So to get us off to a really great start, I'd like to introduce our president, Sherry Tooley, to give a few opening remarks, please. Sherry, take it away.
Thanks, Anne Marie. First, I'd like to say welcome to everybody and thank you for your tenacity as we go into our second virtual year of our lobbying efforts. I know that it hasn't been easy, but you have all stuck in there with us. So we appreciate that. I know that Anne Marie appreciates it. I know that it's more work for both she and Frank. So thank you both. As many of you already know, the AARC signed on as an organization with 140 other groups that support the Connect for Health Act, and that we understand will be introduced very soon. The Connect for Health Act expands the respiratory therapist ability to provide telehealth in new areas being tested by CMS and can improve our access to patient care and treating those with chronic lung disease. The second item that we're going to talk about today is, and also supports the AARC Horizon goals, is to encourage and support diverse and underrepresented populations to enter the respiratory profession. So the Allied Health Workforce Diversity Act would strengthen and expand the use of strategies shown to increase recruitment, enrollment, retention, and graduation of students from those underrepresented and disadvantaged backgrounds in allied health professions, and this includes respiratory therapy. So we are excited to be included in this bill's reintroduction. Anne Marie, would you like to introduce our first guest?
Yes, thank you, Sherry. We are very privileged to have today Lauren Citron from Representative Bobby Rush's office. Representative Rush was one of the original co-sponsors of the Diversity Act when it was first introduced in the 116th Congress, and she's going to give us an update today on where things are. We know it's going to be reintroduced soon, and to give a little background on the bill. So, Lauren, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. You can all hear me okay, but thank you for having me today. I am so glad to be able to be here with you and really, really appreciate your support for my boss's Allied Health Workforce Diversity Act during your upcoming Hill visits. So I thought I'd give you a little bit of background about where the bill came from and where we currently are. So it came to our attention after we learned about a study conducted by the Health Resources and Services Administration, which is more commonly known as HRSA, that found that in the fields of occupational therapy, physical therapy, and speech language pathology, over 77% of practitioners are white. Well, much, much more worryingly, less than 5% are African American. And it's my understanding the same thing is true for respiratory therapists, that the vast majority are white, and there's a disproportionate access for practitioners who are African American and Latino. They're severely underrepresented. And as you all probably already know, this really matters for your patients, because studies have found that when the patient and the practitioner are the same, the same race or ethnicity, there are better health outcomes for patients. So Rep. Rush introduced this bill with Rep. Kathy McMorris-Rogers of Washington, and we modeled it after the really effective Title VIII Nursing Workforce Development Program. And so basically what the 2019 version of the bill would do is it would award grants to eligible occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech and language pathology, and audiology programs to attract, recruit, and retain students through scholarship stipends and mentorship programs, with a focus on students from underrepresented backgrounds, both racial and ethnic minorities, and also those from like rural areas, those who are disproportionately underrepresented in the fields. Because it had bipartisan support, we were able to get it unanimously passed as part of the Title VII Reauthorization Act, which last Congress was HR 2781, the Empower for Health Act. And that was in July of 2019 through the Health Subcommittee, then through the full committee in September of 2019, and then through the full House in October of 2019. So we were able to get it through the full House of Representatives with unanimous bipartisan support, and then it was sent to the Senate. And then before the Senate could consider it, COVID happened. And I think you know where that's going. All the air was sucked out of the room. We had to focus fully on COVID. So the House and Senate had to very quickly pass a clean Title VII reauthorization bill with no new programs included. That meant my boss's bill was dropped out of the text, and this year we have to start all over. While this was really disappointing for us, the silver lining is that it allows us to add respiratory therapists into this legislation. Given the important work you all do always, but particularly during COVID, my boss wanted to be sure that respiratory therapy programs were included as an eligible entity for grants to help encourage diversity in your field. And so we're really glad to be able to do that. This is also really important because it will not only increase the number of practitioners who are from diverse backgrounds, but will help increase access and trust for patients in need of respiratory therapy. So really, again, thank you from the bottom of our hearts for supporting this legislation. We really can't get it over the finish line without you and without your support. The next steps is we need to secure a Republican co-lead, as well as both Democratic and Republican co-sponsors. Congresswoman Morris Rogers, who introduced it with us last year, is still very supportive, but she's now ranking member of Energy and Commerce. And so she can't be the official co-lead, though she does support the legislation. So we need to find another Republican in order to have bipartisan support. It's really important that it's bipartisan because that will help us get through the committee and the full House like we did last year and really help get us over the finish line. So as soon as we have that bipartisan support, we'll be able to reintroduce the bill with respiratory therapists added in, and then we'll be able to really start pushing to have it moved. And then finally, I just wanted to talk to you as a Hill staffer. As you do visits, I want to encourage you to be really flexible. We're, as Hill staff, really, really busy, but especially this week. There's appropriation deadlines looming, and it's probably honestly our busiest week of the year. So as you have meetings, make the most of them, tell your story, put a face to the name and the issues, make your ask, the more concrete, the better, in order to help health staff kind of move it through our process. Thank them for their time. And then most importantly, really, it's important that you follow up in the coming weeks to make sure that your asks don't fall through the cracks as things are so busy right now. So I really want to again, thank you for having me, for your support, and I wish you the best of luck on your Hill visits.
Thanks, Lauren. I know that there are a couple of questions, I think, here in the chat. If anyone would like to ask a question, you can hover over the participant icon and you can raise your hand and unmute yourself and ask a question directly to Lauren if you'd like. One of the questions is, so respiratory will be added as an eligible entity on the old legislative bill prior to being reintroduced once it gets bipartisan support, correct? Yes.
We're updating the text. Respiratory therapists will be one of the eligible entities. And once we have a Republican co-sponsor, we're going to introduce it with this new updated text, as well as some changes from the Senate about who counts as underrepresented to include folks with disabilities. But I think the big change for you all is that the new text that will be reintroduced will have respiratory therapy programs included.
That's correct. And in addition, the way the bill is written, it will also make reference to the eligible entities, which are the programs accredited by COARC for respiratory therapy, and then, of course, the relative accrediting bodies for the other allied professions. And it also gives the national organizations, such as AARC and others, the ability to make recommendations. The Secretary has the flexibility to ask for that. Do we have anything else here in the chat? Any other questions of Lauren?
I had my little hand up, Anne Marie.
All right. I'm sorry, Sherry, I can't see that, but I'd love for you to speak to us, please.
That's okay. Lauren, I can't thank you enough for joining us today. And my question for you is there any one specific that you believe we should be targeting from the Republican side for that co-lead?
That's a good question. I think we're really open. Energy and Commerce members are particularly helpful because they can help us get it through the Energy and Commerce Committee. It helps put pressure on the committee staff to move it when they hear both from the Republican side and the Democratic side. But I think at the end of the day, and if we can get a Republican and get it moving, that's the most important thing. So open to anyone who is interested as you're doing these meetings.
Christine Slocum, I think this is yours. This is your challenge.
I think our CRD associates also can speak to some of the work that we've been doing on the Hill with the other allied professions in getting co-sponsors both on the Republican and Democratic side. Some of the other questions in chat are, if COARC eligible, will that include ASBS, MS? Yes, the grants are eligible for anywhere from associate through PhD. the requirements in the new bill. We have a copy of the old bill in our PACT Connect site, so you can see all of the provisions. The only difference will be to add RT. We will, there are no co-sponsors yet because it hasn't been reintroduced. You can always go to congress.gov and look up the old bill. I can't remember how many co-sponsors there were. Are there any other?
With HR 3637, in case that's helpful.
3637? Okay.
Here's bill number.
Okay, thanks. That's the old bill number. You can look that up, and pretty much the language will be the same except for adding respiratory therapist.
Hi, Dre, I see your hand is up.
You had mentioned that their eligibility requirements who would be able to get this would be changing. What are the specifics of those changes?
I think we're just adding in that folks with disabilities count as an underrepresented group, as well as racial and ethnic minorities and those from disadvantaged populations like rural areas. It will also include folks with disabilities.
Correct.
And the Senate text, which bill number I don't have memorized, they had that last Congress. So we're just, we introduced, then they introduced and updated. And so we're taking their updates and then adding respiratory therapy in. So it's taking the Senate text from last Congress and then adding respiratory therapy. And this, because the Senate had the disability underrepresented groups explicitly listed.
Right. We have been working with Senator Casey and Senator Murkowski's office on the Senate side for a companion bill. So we will continue to get sponsors so that there is a companion bill. We do expect that to happen simultaneously or at the same time. We know that the House is working on this. Anything else here?
Christopher might have a question.
Yes, if perchance, because I teach at a associate degree program, and often we have students that may have completed a bachelor's in a field where it's not real prominent and able to get a good job per se. If they're going back to return to get an education in, say, respiratory therapy, would the grant cover them, or since they've already have an education, would it not cover them? A degree, a college degree, would it not cover them?
I don't remember any restrictions on that. I don't know, Anne-Marie, if you know anything more about how that has worked in the Title VIII nursing program, or how, if you have any insights, but I don't think it would disqualify.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything in the actual Allied Health Workforce Diversity Act. I'm not as familiar with all of the provisions that were in the nursing one. I know that that was a successful program, but certainly if we find that out, we can let folks know as we get more into the details when the bills are introduced.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Okay, do we have anything else here? We can answer some of these chat questions offline and get back to folks. I know Lauren has a meeting she has to get to today. Are there any other questions that people would like to raise their hand and ask?
Keith Hurst had a question briefly.
Yeah, I posted in the chat, but I'll ask it. And my question is does this include therapists who are going on for degree advancement, or is it just for that initial entry-level degree? So, for example, if someone got an associate's and they wanted to go on and get their baccalaureate or master's or PhD, would that bill allow it, or is it just for that initial entry into the profession?
Anne-Marie, do you know the answer to that? I think it's for all levels.
Yeah, I think I know one of the key elements is to make sure that we retain the diversity in the profession. And if that means allowing somebody to go forward with an additional degree, again, there's nothing in the language that would not provide it. But it also is not specific one way or the other. So I think that's a really good question and something we might continue to look into as we move forward.
And my understanding is the grants are given to schools to run these programs. So my gut is that this would be determined at the individual school level how they wanted to allocate the limited grant funding. But
Exactly.
there's restrictions based on the legislation for advanced degrees or having previous degrees or like anything like that. I think it's all about how the schools would want to run the grant program with direction given by the HHS.
Exactly. And since one of the goals for us is to move the profession forward toward a bachelor's degree as entry level, that can be a very good decision that the accredited programs would make in looking at these provisions. Folks, are there anything else here?
Just in terms of looking at the comments, Brian Fitzpatrick is a great member. He is the lead on so many things right now, especially with the appropriations, that their office has very limited bandwidth. If he's interested, we are happy to have him as a co-lead. But I've reached out to him on other things, and they only want to commit if they have the bandwidth, and they're stretched very thin. So it never hurts to ask. If you don't ask, the answer is always no. But just in terms of the Brian Fitzpatrick, that would be my one concern, is if their office has the bandwidth to take this on, because they're very thoughtful about what they take on. They want to make sure that they have the bandwidth.
Okay, good. Anything else from anyone? Anybody want to raise their hand? Amanda, you see any other questions we need to answer here?
I think we're good to move on.
Okay, all right. Lauren, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to be here to talk to us today. It's always really exciting to have someone from the Hill here. It's disappointing, I know, for our folks that we can't be there in person. Hopefully we certainly going to plan to be there next year. So thank you very much and appreciate all the time you've given us. And if we have any follow-up questions, I'm sure we'll be reaching out to you.
Perfect. Thank you all again so much for having me and for your support, and looking forward to working with you all on this bill moving forward and getting it over the finish line this year.
Good. Thanks so much. Appreciate your time. It's now my pleasure to introduce our new Interim Executive Director, Paul Divas, and to give all of you an opportunity to see him and meet him. So Paul, I'm going to turn it over to you to welcome our PAC reps to the meeting.
Thank you, Anne Marie. It really is a pleasure, and I'm delighted to welcome everyone to our first virtual lobby day briefing, hopefully our last. And it is my first lobby day briefing ever as the interim executive director. So I'm very happy to be here. I will tell you, in the short time that I've been here with the AARC, starting back in the first part of January, I continue to be impressed with the dedication of the volunteers for the respiratory profession. Your commitment to improving the profession and the life of the respiratory therapist is truly inspiring. It's not a cliche, and I can't say it enough, but our RTs truly are the unsung heroes of the pandemic. And getting congressional support is a big step to getting RTs and the profession the recognition that they deserve. So Anne Marie has been tutoring me, but I'm still in the learning process of how we approach Hill Day activities. I do know that it's disappointing that we can't all be in person, but everybody keep your fingers crossed and knock on wood that that will change next year. I also want to thank the folks that have sent messages to the Hill in advance of these meetings. Anne Marie solicited and got the support of the entire board of directors in sending out messages to their congressmen and senators. It was really amazing how easy it was for all of us to participate and go through the links. I'll tell you that even for me, clicking through and selecting what I want the message to say was very simple and easy to do. And I hope that everybody, at least on the call, participated in that and would share with me that that was a great process and made it real easy on those. So I think we can still do it. We can send out to your colleagues and friends, family, to send their notes into their congressmen and senators, because everyone helps. I think we'll get a briefing on how many of these messages went to the Hill, but with the system that the way it was set up this year, it sure makes it made it easy, and hopefully we've got a whole bunch. So this is a critical time in the profession and for respiratory therapists to be recognized in legislation, and the legislation validates the role that you play in healthcare. You know, this year especially, or last year and this year, telehealth has taken a stronghold, and that the Connect for the Health Act will continue to expand our opportunities for RTs to improve access to healthcare. This Allied Healthcare Workforce Diversity Act is key. Besides being a key piece of legislation, it really supports the AARC strategic plan. And we are really delighted that RTs are going to be included in that bill. So I'm excited to learn more as we move on and work behind the scenes. But much of the credit for anything that we do here goes to, besides yourselves as volunteers, goes to CRD Associates. So what they're doing with Anne Marie is a huge help and a huge assistance to what we're trying to accomplish here on the Hill with Congress. So our thanks go out to them. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Anne Marie, and she can introduce our next speakers.
Well, thanks, Paul. Thank you, Paul. We're really excited for you to be here. And it's a great segue because the next speakers are our representatives from CRD Associates. Many of you who've participated in this before know Erica Miller and Stephanie Reinhardt. And so I'm going to turn over the next part of the meeting to them to talk a little bit more about the Connect for Health Act, maybe answer some of your questions, and to give you a feel for what this is going to be like in our virtual world today. So Erica, are you going to go first?
No, Stephanie's going to kick it off.
Okay, Stephanie, we'll switch over to you.
Can I go ahead and share my screen? Is that it?
Yes, yes, you may.
All right, perfect. 1 minute. Okay, can everyone see that?
Oh, nice picture.
Excellent. So this is getting you excited for next year when we'll all be back together. Hi, everybody. I'm Stephanie Reinhardt. Thank you all for participating today. Welcome to Virtual Hill Day 2021, and we look forward to 2022 all being back in front of the lovely U.S. Capitol. So I am just going to give you a brief overview of the landscape on Capitol Hill, what's been going on, and some of the main pieces of legislation that are being considered right now. So I'm the House of Representatives, as you probably know, Democrats retained a majority after the election, but it is a much more narrow majority than it was in the last Congress, in the 116th Congress. There are currently 218 Democrats, 212 Republicans, and 5 vacant seats that are going to be filled by special election during this year. Several of those vacant seats are House members who were appointed to cabinet positions in the new administration. So that is why, even though there was just an election, there are several seats that are open already. So this narrow majority, as Lauren alluded to earlier, means that Democrats are having to work with Republicans much more in a bipartisan manner than they might have done in the past. So far, the party has been fairly united in passing bills, but as they're working on more healthcare legislation moving forward, especially around the bills we're going to be talking about, it is really important to have the bipartisan support. As we reach the first 100 days this week of President Biden's term, we have seen that so far, at least the House and the President have been aligned on policy priorities. However, as always, partisanship remains, and we will see how much compromise we can get as we work on legislation moving forward. Although I will say, as Lauren said, and as I'm sure those of you who have participated in the past know, the 2 bills we're talking about today do tend to have bipartisan support. So that is something good to have in your pocket as we're moving forward. All right, so for the Senate, as you probably know, the Senate flipped to give the Democrats a majority after the 2020 elections. There's a 50-50 split of Democrats and Republicans. So Vice President Harris is the tie-breaking vote. So as you can see, you really can't get any more evenly divided than they are right now. This means that it's even more important for the Senate to work in a bipartisan manner to pass legislation. With the change in majority, we have a new Senate Majority Leader, Senator Chuck Schumer from New York, and Senator Mitch McConnell from Kentucky is now the Minority Leader. There are new committee chairs, and we'll talk about some of the committees of jurisdiction for the bills that we're talking about a little bit later in the presentation. So far, it's only been a couple of months, but committees have appeared to want to work on a bipartisan manner to develop and pass legislation. And we've mainly seen partisanship and procedural issues such as the filibuster and on working with the new administration. Just going to quickly go over some of the issues that have been going on the Hill. So a few weeks ago, so in mid-April, President Biden released his initial skinny, we call it skinny budget request for fiscal year 2022. This kicked off the appropriations season in earnest on Capitol Hill. So House committees have been holding hearings on the budget request, and they will start to draft and pass legislation before the appropriations spending bills before the fiscal year ends on September 30th. For the going on to the health issues, back in March, Congress passed the American Rescue Plan. This was a $1.9 trillion relief legislation, mainly related to COVID relief. So it is unlikely that right now Congress will do any further COVID response legislation in the near term, but the pandemic remains top of mind for lawmakers. So they all certainly appreciate the work that you all have done during the pandemic. And I'm sure that will come up during some of your meetings as well, especially as it relates to telehealth. Democrats in the House recently introduced their legislation to lower the cost of prescription drugs, and this will be a priority for the caucus this session. And then around infrastructure, the president had released his American Jobs Plan, which is the first part of the infrastructure package that Congress will be working on back on March 31st. This week, he is giving a not State of the Union, but an address to Congress on Wednesday, and he's expected to release more details on the second human infrastructure component, which we expect will include more healthcare workforce issues. So that is something that we're hoping we can move some of these policy priorities in that second package. Speaker Nancy Pelosi has said she would like to see the infrastructure bills pass Congress, or pass the House at least, by July 4th, and to have them signed into law by the August recess, which the House is out this week, so it's a ambitious timeline to say the least, but we will see if they can get it done. And just really quickly, there's a few non-health related issues that Congress will be considering. There's the non-health provisions in the infrastructure bill, voting rights legislation, and possible immigration reform legislation. So as you can tell from that quick overview, there is a lot that Congress is working on, a lot of priorities going on, and that's why it's really important to have you all here virtually speaking to your members of Congress, reaching out, sending those letters that Paul talked about, and to ask your members of Congress to support passing the Connect for Health Act and the Allied Health Workforce Diversity Act, which I'm going to turn over to my colleague Erica Miller to talk about in more detail.
Thanks, Stephanie. So I'm going to talk more about the two bills that you'll be talking about in your meetings. So next slide, please. We're going to start with the Connect for Health Act and talking about telehealth, which is an issue that AARC has been advocating around for a number of years, at least as long as Stephanie and I have been working with the association. And so obviously the 116th Congress ended focused on the COVID-19 pandemic, but there are a number of lessons that we learned based on what Congress did last year. Some of them aren't new, but they bear repeating. The first one is the cost of large telehealth bills remains prohibitive. And as we'll talk about, the Connect for Health Act is a large telehealth bill. And you might be wondering how now, after a year of predominantly virtual care, the cost could still be prohibitive. So the Congressional Budget Office, often referred to as the CBO, and you might hear that from staff in your meetings, scores legislation. And they continue to score telehealth as costing money. And the conversations that Stephanie and I have had with staff earlier in this year, there hasn't been a shift over there yet in how they're looking at telehealth, which they see as duplicative of in-person care, not a replacement for it. I just recently saw some information coming out of the pandemic, and some of it bore that out and some of it didn't. I think it depended on the type of visit. If telehealth was used in place of sending someone to potentially an emergency room, not duplicative, but some telehealth visits did eventually then result in a follow-up in-person visit. And I'm sure we're going to be seeing a lot more data about what came out of the pandemic. But if you're probably thinking to yourself, if this bill is so big and is so expensive, why are we advocating for it? So larger bills like the CONNECT Act provide a menu of smaller programs that can then be pulled out and included in must-pass legislation. And we've seen this happen before. I think it was COVID has completely screwed with my sense of time, but it was several years ago that a provision on using telehealth for stroke patients was actually pulled out of CONNECT and attached to must-pass legislation. And so having provisions in CONNECT means that it's out there. If the bill moves through committee, then it means that lawmakers have thought about it and it's not new. And so it's a ripe target for when they're putting together large end of year packages like they usually do to pass the fiscal year spending bills and then implement them that way. So I know all of you have spent a lot of time, thinking about telehealth over the last year and how important telehealth has been to treat patients with respiratory diseases like COPD. So the administration made, a number of changes and implemented flexibilities to allow telehealth to be used more widely during the public health emergency. And Congress will have to take action to make those changes permanent. And it's something that offices and staff on the Hill are thinking about already, and you might hear that in your visits in the coming days and weeks. But these are things that are top of mind for Congress, and actually the Ways and Means Committee will be having a hearing on telehealth on Wednesday because many of the flexibility that patients have enjoyed during the pandemic, like receiving a telehealth visit in their own home, that would actually require a statutory change. So this is top of mind and a great time for us to be advocating on the Connect for Health Act and on telehealth issues just generally. Next slide, please. So the Connect for Health Act of 2021, I'm going to start with what's on the bottom of the slide here. Reintroduction of this bill is expected this week. So we are very excited about that. And so I'm sure that a number of staff will be familiar with that. But just a couple of notes here. So we have listed on this slide the House and Senate Telehealth Working Group members. And I will say that the House and Senate not only have been working on telehealth on a bipartisan basis, as you can see, based on the members who are listed here, but it's been bipartisan and bicameral. And so when the Connect for Health Act is reintroduced, we expect it to be reintroduced in the House and the Senate, if not exactly at the same time, to follow very quickly. And so I will note that Stephanie and I have had conversations with folks in these offices, most notably Mike Thompson, who's from California, and Senator Schatz from Hawaii, who are the two leads on the bill. And so they're very familiar with AARC and the, our concerns about the bill. I will also note that we sent a letter to these working group members about the provisions that would benefit respiratory therapists in your patients in the Connect Act. And so we'll talk a little bit about those provisions on the next slide. But so particularly these offices have all received a communication from us about what our priorities are for Connect. So next slide, please. And I see there was a question about the slides. We are happy to share them. Anne-Marie, we can send them to you and then you can help get them out to the group. So talking about the Connect Act specifically, and we know that you've received talking points, but just want to run through what the key provisions here. are for respiratory therapists. And so there's a provision in the bill that was included in the last version of the bill based on conversations that we had with Hill staff that would allow not just respiratory therapists, but respiratory therapists obviously are who we're interested in, but would allow health professionals who cannot bill Medicare directly to furnish telehealth services through innovation center models. So basically that would be allowing the CMS, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services Innovation Center, to test models that would allow RTs to participate and deliver telehealth services. And so this is it's a more general provision than what but accomplishes the same thing that we were trying to do with the Breathe Act in the last Congress. So for those of you who remember the Breathe Act, it created a demonstration that would allow respiratory therapists to deliver certain services to COPD patients through an innovation center or through a model like an innovation center model. And so basically this is a very general provision that would then let a pilot like the Breathe Act occur at the innovation center. So we think this is great. If once this passes, we will then have to go meet with the innovation center and talk about why it's so important. But we marshaled a lot of that data as we were putting together information to get the Breathe Act introduced about COPD, the burden of COPD in Medicare patients, and the work that respiratory therapists do. So we're really excited that this provision is going to be included in the CONNECT Act. It also allows the secretary to test models that specifically examine the use of telehealth. So obviously, you can think about the pandemic as really testing the use of telehealth, but this gives the secretary greater authority to think about how telehealth can be used in a number of different settings. And again, when you think about that, that could easily apply to the work that you all do with your patients. And then again, this bill would provide the secretary with authority to waive telehealth restrictions. Now that has been so important during the pandemic. And you probably don't remember because sometimes I feel like I don't really remember back to last spring, and I was working on this stuff constantly. There was a provision that was passed in one of the early bills that allowed the secretary to waive all of these Medicare telehealth restrictions. And that's why we've been able to see the flexibilities that we have. So basically the CONNECT Act would basically provide the secretary with that waiver authority, and in future public health emergencies, it wouldn't take an act of Congress to allow the secretary to have those waivers. So really important. I will just note that there are studies that show the impact of telehealth on patient education and improving treatment adherence. And that was a big part of what we were trying to do with the Breathe Act. And again, what could be accomplished under the Connect for Health Act. So that's really important, particularly as we think about telehealth outside of the public health emergency. And again, I think one thing that's so important about you doing these visits now is the pandemic has demonstrated how telehealth can really expand access to care. So you all should really, talk about the experiences you've had with telehealth and what it's meant for the patients that you work with over the last year. Because this is, I think, goes to show what the provisions in the CONNECT Act that we're so concerned about are trying to accomplish. So what is your request here? To please co-sponsor the Connect for Health Act when it's reintroduced. So obviously that's hopefully going to be, as we've heard, this week. And so we can follow up with bill numbers as soon as the bill drops in both the House and Senate. But so I think this ask is going to get a little easier because there should be a lot of information about the bill as it's released formally this week. So next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Allied Health Workforce Diversity Act, even though we just heard from Lauren in Representative Rush's office about the bill. And so as you did hear, we have been working with the other allied health stakeholder groups on this and getting this bill reintroduced. And so again, I'm not going to belabor this point, but the bill would provide grants and scholarships and mentorship funding to support, increase the diversity in the allied health professions. And for the first time, the bill would include respiratory therapists. So if you do refer staff to last year's version, you should note that the major change is that respiratory therapists will be added. This actually request came from Energy and Commerce Committee staff, and you might be saying, Erica, who's Energy and Commerce in all of this? So they are the committee of jurisdiction over the bill. So it carries a lot of weight that it was actually their staff that was looking to have respiratory therapists added. So next slide, please. So we have the kind of listed here, the bill sponsors. Like I said, we heard from Lauren in Representative Rush's office in the House about how he will be the Democratic lead again. Lauren also mentioned that Kathy McMorris Rogers, who had been the Republican lead last Congress and is still very supportive, will not be the lead because she is now the ranking member of the Energy and Commerce Committee. And again, I just mentioned that's the committee of jurisdiction. So those who are chair and ranking members of committees are not always very likely to take the lead on a bill that falls within their jurisdiction. But we have heard from her office that she remains very supportive. We are working on identifying a new Republican lead. Don't know if we have any folks from Florida on the line. But one House member who we are considering is Representative Dunn from Florida. He's also on the Energy and Commerce Committee. So as Lauren mentioned, remember having someone on the committee of jurisdiction is important. And so that is not something that we have kind of confirmed or even written in like pencil yet. But it's a target that we have identified with the other stakeholder groups as a good lead. And so if there's anyone that's meeting with Representative Dunn's office, would love to hear reactions from his office on the bill, because it will inform the work that we are doing in coalition with these other members' office. And I see somebody says that you have an appointment with Dr. Dunn's office. So that's great. On the Senate side, we have met with both Senator Casey and Senator Murkowski's offices. Senator Casey has committed to taking the lead on this bill. So if anyone is doing a meeting with his office, you should please thank him for that. And he has met with the stakeholder coalition about the bill. So he is familiar with not only the bill, but also the fact that respiratory therapists are going to be added. And we really appreciate the support of Senator Casey and his staff. We just met with Senator Murkowski's office late last week. She was the Republican lead in the last Congress, and we are moving in the right direction to get her to commit again. So that's great, because again, you heard from Stephanie, and then before Stephanie, you heard from Lauren about the importance of making these bills bipartisan. So we are about 75% there. So that's great. And again, the committees of jurisdiction for this bill are the House Energy and Commerce and the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions committees. And they're the ones who will hold hearings and eventually markups on these bills. And so we're also meeting with those staff about the bill. Lastly, I will just add that as part of our stakeholder group, we met with the White House Domestic Policy Council to discuss the bill. So they're read into this as well. It's been, I will just say, a great effort to be working with the other allied health professions groups. And I know that they really appreciate the work that AARC is doing to support the bill. So it has been great. Next slide, please. So just really quickly, some talking points on the bill. We're asking for co-sponsors on the bill when it's reintroduced. Again, unlike the Connect for Health Act, we don't have a good timeline for when this bill will be introduced. So I will just say it provides a great opportunity for follow-up later on. AARC can definitely let you know when this bill drops, and then help you with messaging to the staff that you met with, letting them know it's been introduced and asking for co-sponsors. But again, I think Lauren touched on some of these points when she was speaking. But I think, again, this is a really important opportunity to talk about the role of respiratory therapists during the pandemic, the workforce needs and challenges that you're all experiencing, and how there is increasing demand for the services that you provide, particularly making sure that you have a well-trained and diverse workforce in the future. And I think, again, if you tying this to the burden of chronic and acute respiratory disease is a good way to tie to make sure you drive home those kind of workforce needs. And Lauren again talked about a diverse workforce improves patient access to care. And again, I think that's something that Congress is very attuned to, about access and making sure that patients have access to appropriate care regardless of where they live. So again, this is, I think, a great ask, and we're really excited to be advocating for this bill this year. So next slide, please. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about what you can expect in your virtual meeting. So next slide. So I will say one thing that is good about doing this in a virtual environment is you have some time. It's not like we're finishing up late tonight and then you've got to get to the Hill first thing tomorrow. You have more time and flexibility. So take some time to look at your members' websites, get to know more about them. And so that red box is where on the congress.gov website, you can put in information to find out who your senators and representatives are. Go and poke around on their websites. You can see what committees they're on. So think about it. If they're on the Energy and Commerce Committee, you know that that's a great opportunity to talk about the Allied Health Workforce Diversity Act. Telehealth actually has split jurisdiction between Energy and Commerce and Ways and Means. And so if you see somebody's on Ways and Means, it's a great opportunity to talk about telehealth and really play up the Connect for Health Act. But you can also look at members' press releases and what they have on their website to get a sense of what areas they're actively engaged on. Just generally, you can sign up for their newsletter and then also follow them on Twitter or Facebook. We don't usually encourage stalking generally, but in terms of advocacy, stalking your members on the different platforms that they use, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or their newsletters is a good way to get a sense for where their interests are and ways that you can drive home messages that will really resonate with them. So next slide, please. So before your meetings, most of your meetings are going to be hosted on Zoom. We'll note right now that not all of the staff will turn on their cameras. Some might even call in, and so you'll see a phone number instead of their names. I will note, as we've gotten further along into the pandemic, I've noticed recently there are more staff who are turning their cameras on, but don't be alarmed or take it personally if they don't. The other thing that we will note, try to log on to your meeting early if possible. That doesn't mean staff will log on early, they won't. You heard Lauren say that this is a busy week, even though they are not in session. So, and also staff does lots of meetings, like their meetings they're doing with you. So they run from meeting to meeting. So definitely don't be alarmed if they're a couple minutes late. When we always prepare you for in-person meetings, we talk about being flexible in terms of meeting in the hallway or in less than ideal circumstances. You don't have to have that kind of flexibility for a virtual meeting, but be flexible and be patient. So during your meeting, they're usually 15 to 20 minutes. Some could be shorter, some could be longer. I will note, I've heard lots of reports from advocates that staff are actually spending more time with them during virtual meetings than they did in person. We have actually heard from Hill staff that they really like the virtual engagement. So depending on how backed up they are, or how many meetings they have back to back, you might get some more time with them than you normally would, but don't I'm not making any promises. I'm just telling you that it's possible. I will also note that the tone of these meetings is supposed to be conversational. Part of the goal here really is to form relationships with staff. And I think Stephanie and I know how effective you all are at doing that, because when we go and meet with Hill offices, they all remember you. So you obviously don't need us to tell you how to do this. It seems like you're already doing a good job, but it's worth the reminder. And a good thing to do, particularly because we're talking about two bills that have been introduced before, is to ask questions. Are they familiar with the individual bills? After you go through the talking points, you shouldn't expect most staff to commit right away and say anything. If they do, take yes for an answer and move on. But again, that's the exception, not the rule. And I think it's a good question to ask: what information would be helpful in deciding whether to support the bill, whether it being the CONNECT Act or the Workforce Diversity Act. And whatever you hear from staff, that would be, if AARC could help you in the follow-up and help you to get that information to the offices, please put that in your feedback forms. We are happy to help you get that information, and it's a good way to make sure that the loop gets closed on that. But as I mentioned, staff almost certainly won't commit to anything during the call. So next slide, please. So what do you expect from congressional staff? So some are going to be very knowledgeable and experienced on the issues. So for instance, if you go to meet with any of the members on the telehealth working group in the House or the Senate, those staff are going to know a lot about telehealth issues generally, and the CONNECT Act specifically. And they might engage a little bit more deeply with you than other staff. But some staff are going to be new to the issues. And again, I think this is a really important opportunity to provide education and information, not only about the two bills that we're going to be talking about, but also about AARC and the respiratory therapist profession. And again, I don't want to sound self-serving, but when you all do that, it's really helpful when we do additional advocacy throughout the year, when they're familiar with AARC and respiratory therapists. And I will just share as an anecdote, when we were working on the Breathe Act last Congress, we had already lined up bipartisan support, but somebody went in to meet with former Representative TJ Cox's office, and they were so interested in the bill that they wanted to be a co-sponsor, and so they were. And then we worked with Representative Cox's office on some other pandemic-related issues during the year, and it was because of the connection that you all made and the education that you provided about the respiratory therapy profession that really got them interested, not only in the Breathe Act, but also in the work that respiratory therapists did as well. So again, I think as you think about this from that kind of educational perspective, generally, not just the bill specifically, if there are offices that say that they, that seem particularly interested in the profession, that are interested in more information, you should note that on your follow-up forms as well. But generally, you're going to find that staff are somewhere in the middle between knowing a lot and knowing very little. I think it's really interesting. Stephanie and I presented to the AARC board recently, and somebody asked us if there seems to be more awareness and understanding of the profession because of the pandemic. And we are seeing that, but I also think it would be very interesting to see if you see that as well during your meetings. So next slide, please. So how to tell your story. Why are you doing this instead of me and Stephanie? First of all, you're all constituents. So you have the ability to make these asks local. How is it going to help your patients? How is it going to help, your practice? What's it going to do, in terms of your district or your state? If you work in a very rural state where there are workforce shortages, telehealth could be an important tool for making sure that all patients have the benefit of the care that you provide, regardless of their ability to travel and access to a respiratory therapist. So keep those things in mind and really frame the asks in terms of what do you want and why, and how is it going to help your patients and other. Remember, patients are constituents as well, and they vote as well. So staff think about them when they're figuring out, what side of an issue they want to be on. And then again, like, why is this important in the broader health policy or political context? And I think that's really easy right now as we think about telehealth. It's on everybody's mind, and making sure that patients have access to care where they are is really important as we think about how successful it's been during the pandemic. I think, we've really seen that patients who would have been at significant risk of COVID-19 were able to continue to get the care they needed for their chronic conditions that were not COVID by telehealth, and they were able to do it successfully. So why is this important? Again, I think that's an easy case to make with the Diversity Act. Lauren shared some of the points about, patients not only having access, but being able to trust their healthcare providers. And so I think that there's a lot of good ties here with the two bills that we're advocating for. But again, the most effective advocacy comes from combining data and personal stories, and you are the ones who are bringing those personal stories to these visits. So we are deeply appreciative of the time that you're taking to do this. So next slide, please. Other things to remember: present your main points, don't go off message. If you don't have an answer to a question, that is okay. It's a great opportunity for follow-up. Offer to get them the answer and then follow up with them later. And Anne-Marie and Stephanie and I are available to help you get those answers. And so we're here and put all that information on your follow-up form. Don't forget your asks. We're looking for co-sponsors for both the Connect for Health Act, which hopefully is going to be reintroduced this week, and then the Allied Health Workforce Diversity Act whenever it's reintroduced. And again, great follow-up opportunity when it drops. Do accept yes for an answer, and don't forget to say thank you. Staff really appreciate it when you say thank you for their time and their attention to whatever it is you're talking about, the Connect Act and the Allied Health Workforce Act right now, and then work with AARC on follow-up after the meetings. You heard from Lauren how important follow-up is, because staff, particularly on the House side, might be a little bit distracted. So make sure that you follow up with your main points after the meeting. And so that includes our remarks, and I can turn it back over to Anne-Marie, or Anne-Marie, we can maybe take some of the questions, which I've only peripherally seen popping up in the chat box.
Yeah, I've been looking at some of the ones in the chat box. One of the things that I was going to mention is Erica mentioned studies that show that telehealth is effective. This is particularly with respect to COPD. When we were pushing this a couple of years ago, we had a list of those studies that we provided. So I will put that on the Connect on the Connect site on PACT. The other thing is our allied coalition, if you will, working with the PTs, OTs, speech and audiologists, did some comments to the HELP Committee on the Diversity Act. And there's a lot of good information in there, but it also references the Institute of Medicine's study about the need for diversity in the workforce. And I think that might answer some of the questions that have been in the chat box, particularly Rhonda, the one you just asked. So I will dig up that study. I'll also give you a copy of our comments to the HELP Committee, because they're very important in some of the key issues that were made relative to why it's important to have diversity in the professions. Does anybody have any questions for Stephanie and Erica? That was a great presentation. We'll make the slides available on the PACT Connect site, as she's indicated. I don't see anybody want to raise their hand, ask any questions. I don't see any at this point. All right, so before I turn it over to Frank, thank you both, Stephanie and Erica, for a great presentation. Really, really helpful. And we appreciate all that you've done because, folks, listen, we wouldn't be where we are today if it weren't for these two women who have done a fantastic job of working in the background to help make sure that we are working with the right folks who can make the decisions to get things done. So we really appreciate it. A couple of housekeeping things. I want to remind you to please go to the Connect community. The PACT documents, which are in the library. We've got the background papers. We have talking points. We have slides. I will put these slides in there. Kathy Blackman is finishing up the after meeting report form, which we'll do later on when we get out of this meeting. That will allow you to put at least 6 meetings on one form. This is similar to what most of you used last year. And if there's any follow-up, there's a comment box to tell us what they might need. Sometimes they might just want another visit. They might want documents. They might want studies. I will remind you, because I think it's an important point that Erica made, in the talking point document, there is a link to the American Lung Association's prevalence data on lung disease in this country. You can drill it down by congressional district. It is very important if you're meeting with one of your representatives that you can say, well, in Fairfax County, Virginia, there are 530,000 folks who have COPD. So that's really making it personal, and that's really honing it in for that particular representative. So I know folks don't do that a lot, but as Erica says, you've got time to do this time around. We're not all sitting in Washington waiting for one day to get all this done. I also will say, as I've mentioned before, if you can't do meetings now, please continue to do them through May. It's really important. I've noticed that some of the meetings that have been scheduled are actually with your member or the senator or representative. And that's something that's really critical. We don't get to do that very often when you're actually on Capitol Hill. And we will do a debrief probably later on next month because we know a lot of meetings are going to take place in May. So that will be important too. So Frank, as you know, Frank Salvatore heads up he's the chair of our Advocacy and Government Affairs Committee. And one of the things we've always done if we were face-to-face is to sort of have a mock-up of what to expect if you were actually in a meeting. So I'm going to turn it over here to Frank in a second. Amanda has put the link to the community in the chat box. And I will say that because we have people that register, right up to the last minute, and we have a new folks, if you're not in the PACT community, you can't get this information. And I want to thank Amanda File for taking the time to get all of you logged in today. Remember, you have to be an active AARC member, and your membership has to be paid up before you can start lobbying. So please, I think there are only a couple of folks that we had to reach out to get that taken care of. So Frank, I'm going to turn over to you wherever you are.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Trying out a new microphone, so hopefully things don't screw up on me here. Well, actually, isn't this usually the time where I talk about how do we get from the hotel to the subway stop and, whether we're going to do the blue line or the yellow line? I'm really missing that. But before we do have some of the Government Affairs Committee people on here. It's going to be very hard to do what we normally do. And I can't even say how many of you are new, because according to my screen, I have 4 pages of 25 on each screen. So we have 100 people on here. There ain't no way I'm going to be able to see all your hands raised at one time. So for those of you that are new, what we can do is we can probably make this smaller. And if we could keep the co-hosts on or the host on after I just go over some data, we can do some talking about how to do a visit if it's your first time. If you are with somebody who has done it before, you should meet together before your first meeting. Now, for me, Kim and Lisa are the Connecticut PACT reps, and I'm helping them out. And we had a Zoom last Thursday where we got together and we took that nice PowerPoint that Anne Marie sent out to everybody. I put the nice CTSRC logo on it and made sure that it, instead of saying Wisconsin, it says Connecticut. And we kind of talked a little bit of how we're going to handle things with we only have 2 meetings on Wednesday, at noon and at 12:30 with our senators. We're still working on scheduling the other 5, the House of Representatives side. So we'll do that afterwards. So, but let me give you some update on numbers. Now, first of all, did you notice it's a little bit different this year sending messages? We are trying to personalize them a little bit more rather than the canned letters that we've done in the past. So you get to pick different comments for the bills, who you are and all that. So at this point, as of 2 o'clock today, 3,372 advocates have sent messages since April 1st. I had to go back because my letters wouldn't be counted because I was testing the system early on. So that's why I say April 1st. That comes out to 30,319 emails. Now, for those of you that have been PACT reps for a long time, don't do the math. The 3 times each advocate doesn't work with this one. Plus, we do know people are sending multiple messages. There's some people that wake up every morning and send a message every day. And, as much as I say, it's not really, a great thing to do. You don't really need to do that. Why don't you find another person every day to write for the first time rather than yourself write every day? We do know that that's going on. This year, we turned on the shares for Facebook and Twitter. So Twitter seems to be getting most of the shares, 1,640 shares. And Facebook, we actually have about 88 shares. Now, Natalie, my good friend from Pennsylvania, grilled me last week on how this works. As far as I know, the Facebook shares and the tweets, when you get to the end of your message, you know how the screen comes up and says share on Facebook, share on Twitter. That's the only way it counts. It has no magic way to go on to Facebook and then count. One of the things I'm hoping is once I got it right, I put AARC_tweets, which is the handle for the AARC. Hopefully the AARC can have that scrolling list on the front page so they can see those coming up while we're doing this. And then the other thing is the hashtags. As long as you use the hashtags that we put out previously, I think we might be able to get some data off of Facebook and Twitter aside from phone to action. So who's writing? Of those 3,372 advocates, 71.8%, 72% are respiratory therapists, 18% are supporters, 9.6% are students, and 0.3% are physicians. So obviously, the RTs are doing what we need them to do. Hey, educators on the phone, probably your 323 students sent the messages, but if not, let's get them going because the students should be up there in the number 2 spot and not a distant number 3. Because this is their profession we're talking about. So that's the stats. I'll send out data. I'm sure you notice I'm a little slower with the data this year than previously. I used to do daily updates, but like you guys, work is crazy. We're running anywhere from 50 to 80 COVID patients a day. And I don't know about you, but most of them are on high flow or non-invasive. So they're taking up a lot of time. So, stay safe. And that's the statistics. I didn't put the chat up. So Anne Marie, I don't know if there's any questions for me.
Let me see. I was just looking here, Frank. Just lost the chat. I don't see any. I don't see any. Yeah, it is a little difficult to sort of do a mock-up meeting. I think Erica and Stephanie have done a good job of going over what to expect, how to present yourself. Certainly, if there are any questions, you can put them in the PACT community, and Frank and I can get those answers to you. So I think that's probably the best way to handle it. And particularly if you're new and you're with someone else, that's obviously going to give you a cushion than if you were just walking into an office by yourself, as some people have done in the past.
You know, if you want, Anne Marie, if you're brand spanking new, and God, we're going to give everybody a lot of time back here because we're at about 45 minutes before the end of what we usually do. Boy, we'd be getting ready to go out to where would we be going tonight, Sherry? Do you remember?
I do.
Yeah, our legal seafood trip is the first night. So
absolutely.
Yeah, Natalie put it in the chat. So 5 minutes if you want. We can say goodbye to everybody, and if there's anybody who are absolutely new and don't have a seasoned PACT rep working with them, I'll be glad to take for the next 5-10 minutes. You guys can be the last ones on, and I'll take questions. And if any of my committee members want to stay on too and help me, because I don't know everything, so that would be helpful too. I see Dre has her hand up.
Sorry, it takes me a second to unmute. Did you figure out the multiple firing of the messages? Because when I had done the practice with our conference, I used a fake email, fake name, and everything, and I didn't never hit send.
As Anne Marie will tell you, we have not gotten information back from Phone to Action. We did ask them to look at that. I've been trying to see if I can pull the data and figure it out. I mean, Dre, same thing for me. I know I sent 3 messages and I got credit for 68 messages sent. So there is some, I don't know if because we're using Convo, is it taking each of our choices as a message? Which means instead of, before we knew that one letter was going to the senator, to 2 senators and the congressperson, and we could say it's 3 messages per advocate, it may be a little bit more because now there's 3 choices for each of the 3 questions. So they may be adding up on top of that. So the hope is, and what I think is actually happening, is the number of letters going are just that nice conglomeration of everything, but we'll find out more in the future here.
Thanks.
Okay. Let's see. Rhonda, I thought we took care of Rhonda's question. Let's see. Where is Rhonda on here?
Rhonda,
you wanted to know about some
the
data.
numbers we're using.
Yeah, it's the Human Resources Survey, the only data we have on diversity. And Amanda's put that link in the chat box. I can tell you the overall picture is that in the survey is done in 3 different sections. The educators, the RTs are one, and then the acute care. So I'm looking at the RT survey. Of the respondents, 82% of respondents are white, 10% are Black. There's a very significant underrepresentation in Hispanic, Latino, Spanish. And then for the first time this year, it broke it down to a lot of other ethnic groups. So there is a chart in this Human Resources Survey that will show you the percentages of the other ethnic groups. And that's the only data that we have, but that's new data. So you can find that on the AARC website, and you can also just Google Human Resources Survey when you go into that.
And don't let the link says 2014 on
Yeah.
it. It is the 2020 data. So it is
Right.
the most up-to-date data that the AARC has.
Right. Okay, so I think this concludes the briefing. If there are folks that want to stay on and take advantage of Frank and some of his folks to help you through this, if you are new and you're the only representative from your state, we're happy to have you stay on for a while. I think Kathy and Asha or Amanda, the others that are helping me out here, can stay on as well. But others are free to leave. If you have any other questions, be sure and just communicate through our PACT community. That's what it's there for. And that will help us answer the questions and get you any additional data that you want.
And
Okay.
I want to thank everybody, especially Erica, Stephanie, and come on, guys, Anne Marie. Without you, we would not be where we are. So,
Oh.
Anne Marie, thank you very much. I know she desires to be in the scene that's behind her. So we're thankful that she's continuing on and not somewhere in Italy touring around. So, Anne Marie, thank you.
Yes, one other thing Sherry wanted me to mention. I did send an email to Dr. Boas, who is the chair of our Board of Medical Advisors, last week after our board meeting, and asked him to please reach out to all of our board of advisors. And they were very helpful last year. So he has sent that message out yesterday with a link to include them in our statistics. So I'm hoping to see the physician statistics, Frank, creep up here considerably. The other thing is we did an all staff meeting at AARC in the executive office the other day, and we had all of our executive office staff send in messages at the same time. So if you're able and you're around groups or even your friends, please do this. Remember, you can text on your phone. You don't have to be near a computer. You can text AARC lobby all together in all capital letters to 52886, and it will take you immediately to the phone to action link, and you can take care of sending your messages in there and filling out those multiple choices.
And for those of you, the Government Affairs Committee has been diligently working in the background here and got me a lot of information. And just, you know what, I'm going to say it out loud because I'd rather be successful than have to point out that we didn't do what we say we're going to do. We're looking at the state affiliate boards and the AARC board and BOMA. We at probably next week, I will take all the data that the state, your state liaisons got for the people who are on your boards, and we will give you numbers on percentage. We're not going to tell you who did or didn't, okay? But we're going to give you a percentage of engagement by each state affiliate. So maybe pass that on to your boards because that'll be something that I think that will be really well received if we can say that we had high engagement of our leaders.
And with that, I want to say a huge shout out to Frank and his committee, because you guys don't know the work that they do in the background. Frank has his committee with assignments for each state. They work directly with the state affiliates, the presidents, and keep everybody informed. And without them, and without Frank being able to do the data, it isn't going to happen with me. I am like technologically challenged when it comes to these things. And so Frank can go into our phone to action and find all of these statistics, and we couldn't do it without him. So let's give a big round of applause for Frank as well, because he's a key element here. Okay, if there's nothing else, we're going to say this is the end of our meeting, unless there are those of you who want to stick on and are new and want to chat with Frank and his folks. Otherwise, I will thank you very much. We'll follow up with some additional documents in the PACT community website. Please check that out. All of the resources are there. We have separate folders, and I'll be adding to those a little later on today. And I will mention one more time, the after meeting form, Kathy's still finalizing, and we will have that available to you, because I know there's some meetings going on today and tomorrow. And so you can do multiple meetings on that one form. And thank all of you. I want to thank Kathy, Asha, and Amanda from our executive office for helping me out today and helping with the chat box and the participants. We couldn't do it without you either. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, guys and gals.
Okay.
Everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Sherry. Thank you, Paul, for being on and for giving some opening remarks. We appreciate the time that you've spent today as well.
All right.
Nice to see everybody. Thanks.
Yep.
Take care, Gary.
And the numbers are going down. Okay, if you've stayed on because you are a lone PACT representative without a seasoned person, we're down to 2 pages of people's. Put your hands up. Put your hand up if you have a question, and then we'll just take them in order and try to answer questions. Because that's how we're going to run this. we're not going to do a mock visit per se.
Yeah.
It's going to be too hard to do it. So
Yeah.
if you've got a question, put your hand up. I know you'll pop up to the top of the box here. If
Does
not,
everybody know how to put their hand up?
Good. So
Mike does. Mike Madison. There you go. Oh, you've got some.
So reactions, you go into reactions and then you hit raise hand, and then your hand goes up and you come to the head of the class here. So
Dee Dee Gardner had her hand up for a minute. There
Yeah.
she is again.
Go ahead, Dee Dee.
I did. I was test driving to make sure it worked. But so like when we went to PACT, I was brand new, and that was a few years ago. And I've been hypoxic since then, so I don't really remember all that we did and said that day. So I just looking at the PowerPoint, that gives us a lot of education to share with these representatives. Or actually, we are meeting with 0 representatives for Texas because none of them responded back. Only their staffers have responded back saying that they will meet with us, which it is what it is. And so I can see about following up with them or even rescheduling. It's just we had already scheduled by the time we learned it was okay to meet with them later. So I didn't want to go undoing what was already done. But just, when we're talking to them to go back to, visiting with these people or these representatives about what's going on, I feel a little out of my element, if you will.
So, I mean, the biggest thing is, remember they're human, because just because we're speaking to somebody in Washington doesn't put them above us, although sometimes they may want to make us feel that way. They're not, okay? I think the easy part is going to be doing these virtually, okay? Because you can have your pad of paper ready to go. So use the talking points, use the PowerPoint, especially if you use the PowerPoint and you've kind of got that down pat, but don't read off of it. Okay. Summarize what's on the PowerPoint. And, one of the things that we found was the first thing we all do is we go in and we introduce ourselves. And invariably the first question out of one of our mouths is, do you know what a respiratory therapist is? Okay. And the beauty is, since we've been doing this, okay, now it's been 2 years, so we don't know, but most of them, we were meeting in Connecticut, we were meeting with the same people year after year after year. So we just updated how everybody's been doing. But just do a quick down and dirty. What is a respiratory therapist? Okay. If any of you have a patient who are on the call with you, make sure you take time to introduce them early on. Okay. Because they may be the most powerful speaker for you. And then you're going to get to your talking points, and you're going to find as you get closer to they may stay on longer, but guide yourself to a 15-minute spiel. Okay. Let them keep you longer. Okay. And then make sure you get your asks in at the end. Write it all out. Okay. And I think that's, and asking them, do they know what a respiratory therapist is? Invariably, they say, yes, I met with you before. No, I don't know what a respiratory therapist is. Or, you know what? My cousin has asthma, and I know that they've gone to the hospital and seen a respiratory therapist. So, that just break the ice and then just get into your routine, and don't, if you're going to put the slides up on the screen, don't read off the slide. Okay. Paraphrase what's on the slide.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. By the way, you look great.
Thanks.
I just put in the chat, just so you know, we do have some talking points that are in the PACT community in the documents folder. And we do have some talking points for patients. We were asked to provide some of those. And so be sure and check those out.
I think these are them, right?
That's it. Thank you, Frank.
All right. So these are the talking points, and they're right there in the library underneath. It's the 2021 Hill Day. It might end up here. Hold on one second. And then when you go to the library, is the library showing up? You're muted, Anne Marie.
I'm sorry. There's a bar up at the top that says library, and there's library discussions, etc.
Can you see my screen? Am I in the library on my screen, or am I still on the other page?
Showing the document.
Yeah.
You're in the document, not necessarily in the library.
Unfortunately, you got to keep coming out to change it. But, when you go into the library, and I'll show that real quick. Okay. That should be the library now, right? You gotta give me a thumbs up, because all I see is mouse moving.
Yeah. It says that you've started sharing your screen. Double click to enter full screen mode.
It's not there.
All right. Nah, you know what? I found that Zoom doesn't like me. So I share the first thing I share is good. And then when I try to share something else, it just goes away. But if you go under PACT documents, under the 2021 PACT materials, Anne Marie has everything in there, including the background papers. What I did when I made my appointments, as soon as I set up the appointment, now for Connecticut, I was the Zoom person. I sent the, and there it is. Somebody just put it up on the screen. I sent them the Zoom link, but in the body of the message, I put the background papers. Okay. So they had what we're going to talk about. They can do their their research before, hopefully, and have that stuff there. Gary, Mike, Keith, you guys, Natalie, trying to see who else, John, you guys, am I missing anything? Any words of wisdom from you guys?
I think, I was going to say, I think we're in a unique situation to really bring home what's gone on the last year, what respiratory's been like for the last year. The other thing I think when you're looking at the Workforce Diversity Act is to really bring home the shortages in respiratory, and that we need to get a more diverse group, and part of filling those shortages will be by getting a more diverse group of people.
Yep. Yeah, and I was going to say, I've been working a lot on our state side legislative stuff, and we did some virtual meetings with our members on the state level, and it was actually really it was great. We had a good conversation with the members. They didn't seem rushed, or they're now used, after doing this for a year, they're used to Zoom meetings, and I think it's easier for them to deal with than it has been trying to meet in person like that. So I think it'll be interesting to see how that relates on the national side, but I think it'll be similar. You're muted, Frank.
Natalie, you got your hand up. You got to unmute, Natalie. It's the most.
Sorry, I'm on my phone. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Oh, I'm on my telephone. I hate when I have to unmute in multiple places. It's another weird Zoom thing. So I would just say, for those nervous about doing their meetings, having done them for the first time or not having done them in a while, don't worry about not knowing information. That's what people are most nervous about. Like, what if they ask me a question I don't know the answer? That's actually a fantastic situation to be in, because that gives you good reason for follow-up to continue conversations with them. So if they ask you a question, just say, that's a great question. I'm not sure of the answer, but I'm going to find out and get back to you. And then you have the ability to follow up with them and keep a good line of communication going with them. When everything is nice and tied up in a pretty bow at the end of that meeting, you got to like find a good reason other than just your cut, rewind, play. Hey, it was nice to meet with you. Thanks for taking the time for a follow-up, because you always want to do follow-up. It's much easier to keep the conversation going when you're answering a question. And then they see that you're following through, which is good.
Good points. Good points. Any other questions?
I have one, Frank. I'm a co-host, so I can't raise my hand. So I
Yes,
haven't.
you can. You just go like that.
That's what I did. Yeah, that's all I got. So I haven't done lobbying since I came to the AARC. I did it for our local public broadcasting affiliate. And when we did it, we would leave them with a little cheat sheet of the ask, right?
Mhm.
So I'm just wondering, what is the difference? How do you do that in Zoom? Or is that, as Natalie and you've suggested, it's the follow-up part where you put the ask in the email? Or how are you handling that?
I like I said, I think I'm giving them the paperwork ahead of time when I set up the Zoom. That's what I did for Connecticut. But the other possibility is to get the email address from them, and you should get, and that's the other thing, you should get the email address at the end of the conversation, because we don't have the business card pass off. That was a big thing when we'd walk in, we'd pass off the business card. So make sure that if the person that you're meeting is the person that you emailed previously, follow back through with them and then re-put those documents that you would have handed them into the email. So I'm planning on, inundating them. The nice thing is I'm not killing a tree. So they're getting them with the invite, and they're going to get it on the follow-up email as well.
Yeah, we have suggested that folks send the background materials ahead of time, but either way is fine. I don't think it really matters. Sending it ahead of time gives them, some information so that they can prepare as well as you can prepare for the meeting. So that's always helpful. When the bills are reintroduced, we will update those background papers and put the bill numbers in there. And then, of course, we're going to have to change our lobbying to say now support and co-sponsor the bill, because now we know we have a bill and we have that number. So we'll keep you posted on that as soon as we have that information.
Any other questions? Let's see. I got, this is weird. I have Anne Marie Hummel, but that's not Anne Marie Hummel asking. Look, you were talking, you got to unmute.
Hi.
There you go.
I am
Hey.
Kimberly Smith from the Maryland, D.C. Society of Respiratory Care. I had a quick question. Are we supposed to reach out to the particular representative to request a scheduled meeting?
Yeah. What you can do is contact the office either by phone, or if you have email information. Pretty much, I think a phone call is probably the best way to get who the person is to send the email. And then you just get on whoever's call sheet or email, and you send it to them, and they'll set it up with you. So, I had to call a couple times, and we're still trying to deal with the Congress people, with the representatives, but the senators, which usually are our hardest ones, were the easiest one this time. But yeah, you should contact them ahead of time, because they don't know they need to call you.
Kimberly, I would just contact Carolyn. She usually makes most of your meetings and coordinates that for Maryland, DC. Carolyn Williams.
Yeah, she's right.
She's
Kim,
walking
on
behind
my
the San Francisco Bridge.
I was gonna say,
walking around the Golden Gate Bridge back
there. She just came off the Golden Gate Bridge, because Carolyn is above you, Kimberly, on my screen. So super volunteer from Maryland, DC Society. I bet you, Kim, she's got all that stuff already in the works. Go ahead, Carolyn, you
Okay,
can
thank
unmute.
you.
Hey, Kimberly, I'll call you after the meeting, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Which
Welcome.
Kimberly, that's code for, oh, she's got a list for you.
Did you see Mike Madison had his hand
Yep,
up?
I was going to go to him next. Michael, the guy from the left coast. They don't know how to mute on the left coast. It's 3 hours behind. It'll come up.
They know how to mute. They don't know how to unmute.
We can have
Hey,
fun.
yes, they do.
I just asked him to unmute here.
Okay.
Mike, you should get a note.
It's down at the bottom, Mike, on the left side. It looks like a little microphone. Click on it. It'll unmute you. There's a bar down at the bottom. We can't hear you.
You're not on a phone too, are you? Oh,
There
you
we
just
go.
unmuted. Are you on a phone also? No?
Okay.
Yeah. Put it in the chat.
You're unmuted now, Mike. You are actually unmuted. Amanda unmuted you, but we still can't hear you.
I kind of like the new mic.
Is the sound on your computer? Have you turned your computer speakers on?
Yeah, he has a microphone issue.
Okay.
Sounds like his microphone didn't connect. Mike, you can call me afterwards, but I'm sure Mike probably has some good wisdom to impart. And unfortunately, we unplugged his microphone and didn't tell him.
Maybe post it in Connect, right?
Yeah. So yeah, he can do that. All right. Any other questions? All right, cool. I think we beat this horse.
That's
So,
been very helpful. I appreciate Frank, appreciate your committee folks standing by, and
Yep.
Thanks again to the executive office staff for keeping us in line and helping with the chats and the participants.
Yep, I appreciate you guys doing that. Thank you. I know this is a little longer than we thought, but we can sign off now.
Yeah.
And thank you, everybody. Good luck, and please stay safe.
And I will
right.
let everybody know when our PACT meeting is in 2022, because it's going to be live. We've already told the Hilton we're on our way. And
All
maybe
right.
you'll see the construction of the new Amazon building, because it's going to be a hemisphere shape. It's quite impressive. But anyway, more later on that.
Hey,
Thanks
as long
again,
as they don't
everybody.
take our legal seafood and the restaurant row
That's
away, we'll
right.
be fine.
Oh, I don't know about that. Okay. Thanks,
All right.
everybody. We're
Take it
signing
easy,
off.
Bye-bye.
Everyone.
Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.